Hello everyone, and welcome back to the channel. I am Realtor Nick Belmore, and today I wanted to look at some important pieces of the housing market as we're going forward. And actually today I'm going to be reacting to a video that came out, oh my gosh, it looks like about a month ago or so. And one of the things that they're looking at in this video, and this is from CNBC News, they're talking about why builders can't keep up with the demand when it comes to housing. Let's check this out. Let's see what we're dealing with and why some of these builders just simply can't keep up today.
Building enough homes.
The amount of inventory that we've seen increase has taken the level of existing home inventory to 3.8 months. Normal is 6.
Builders completed over 1.5 million new housing units in the 12-month period that ended in July 2024. That still wasn't enough to end a housing shortage that's a decade in the making.
Not only were we underbuilding for a decade.
So yeah, I mean, obviously this is very key in hindsight of how long the shortage or how impactful the housing shortage really has been on throwing prices out of alignment with really affordability and out of alignment with people's income. So a couple of things, and maybe they're going to get into this, but one of the big things that I've seen in my career is there's no doubt a piece of this comes from the initial housing collapse that we saw in 2006, 2007, 2008. It really ran all the way to 2012. And one of the big things that we saw in that market is that builders were going out of business left and right. And one of the other things that happened when that happened, all the trades and the subcontractors that worked for them ended up also going out of business. And even still today, I think that is a huge piece of why people left those industries and didn't return. Not only that, people told their kids, oh man, be careful, this is a tough thing, remember when, and you didn't see as many young people moving into some of the skilled building trades. And even today, the majority of builders you talk to will talk about how hard it is to find skilled tradespeople. So definitely a big contributing factor to our inability to keep up with demand in the housing market. Of course, there's also some other risk factors.
Underbuilding for a decade, but then you get to the pandemic and there's this massive rush on housing.
That's making home prices rise fast in many parts of the country.
So if you are waiting for that market to really dip, it's not going to happen. The reason for that is that we are so underbuilt.
Both 2024 presidential candidates have ideas to fix the housing market, but neither stance seems to prioritize a key underlying issue.
A lack of competition is also contributing to the low supply of housing.
Really interesting. So we just did videos, and you guys can go back and check them out on the channel. They broke down both parties' view and response to what's happening in the housing market. And I'm going to have to say, I agree with this article. Nobody's addressing the core of the issue when it comes to those policies.
Can politicians do anything about the housing shortage? And if so, why haven't they yet? For years, builders in the United States have made fewer homes than the U.S. needs. There are various estimates for the scale of the shortage,
which is estimated anywhere from 2 to 8 million. Some people put it at even 20 million housing units that we are short.
The shortfall in new construction sent home prices trending higher over the past decade. The typical newly built home in the United States cost about $417,000 in June 2024.
So just under $500,000 for the most part.
Around $430,000. But the typical household only brought in around $75,000 a year in 2022, the most recent year with data available. Purchasing a home in many major U.S. cities would require over $130,000 in household income. Meanwhile, many people have depleted their savings following the pandemic.
We're absolutely seeing a trend of consumers, home buyers, moving from California to the Southwest and Texas, moving from the Northeast to Florida and Georgia, because of a lower cost of living, less state tax.
We are seeing that. Is it solely based on a lower cost of living? That I don't know. I think a lot of it comes into poor governance through the pandemic in certain states. I think a lot of it looked at expanding economic opportunity. I think a lot of it people saw as there was more homework and they were able to run and operate their businesses from their homes, that they were looking for different climate and different features as we went through the pandemic as well.
Less state tax, better weather. About half of the new home sales in the country are in 10 cities. And that includes 4 cities in Texas. It's much faster to get zoning and entitlement improvement. And so as that happens, then you can move it through the cycle faster.
Decisions from the Federal Reserve can affect the real estate cycle too.
I think we're
About
seeing
18
that.
million households were priced out of home ownership between early 2022 and October 2022 as mortgage rates rose, according to the National Association of Home Builders. That economic tightening is slowing down the development of new housing too.
In the housing sector, investment stalled in the second quarter after a strong rise in the first.
There were fewer residential building permits issued and fewer housing projects started in 2024 than there were in 2023.
The expectation, of course, is that the Fed will lower their rates in September. And while mortgage rates don't exactly follow the Fed, they are influenced by what the Fed does.
Well, now that we have seen the Fed lower those rates in September, and we know the Fed came down half a basis point in September, the reality is, though, the impact it had on mortgage rates, very minimal. We're still sitting today around that 6.5 mark. We also know the impact it's had on the real estate market, ultimately, in the short term, also very minimal.
A lot of summer potential buyers were waiting till fall to see if rates would come down even more.
Some big builders have offered deals on mortgage rates to help home buyers bridge the gap. For example, the home builder D.R. Horton offered some buyers in the
we're seeing this locally as well.
1-year 3.5% interest rate.
We're not seeing it the same as temporary. We're seeing it here as a permanent 30-year buy down on a lot of these rates from our builders. Definitely a great incentive.
Buy down the mortgage rate. That is an advantage big builders have that private, smaller builders do not have.
There were over 400,000 businesses building homes in the United States in 2023. The industry remains fragmented, but the biggest firms have advantages that are helping them increase their control of numerous local housing markets. Just 10 builders are behind more than half of the new homes in 49 of 50 metro regions in the United States.
We're seeing cities like Tampa as an example, where today the top 10 builders have more than 80% market share. That just makes it very hard for any new builder to get a foothold.
If you look at relevant markets, well defined for housing, then you see that in many places it took the two firms that were merging from having 30% each to having 70 or 80 or 90% of the housing market. What's really critical here is the definition of a housing market. No matter how many developers you have building in San Francisco, if you live in the suburbs of DC in Virginia, those developers in San Francisco do not constitute a competitive threat to your market.
The largest 100 home builders in the United States were behind about half of new single-family home sales in 2023, according to researchers at Johns Hopkins.
The top 10 builders combined had 10% market share. Today, only 3 decades later, the top 10 have 50% market share. And Horton, the biggest, has 15% market share. So the concentration has been accelerating. My team estimates that about...
Now, clearly that's an issue, right? I mean, and that's a huge part when we're seeing that consolidation and we're still not meeting the demands. Because what do we typically expect? When you're consolidating these companies, efficiencies are going to increase, buying power is going to increase, those things are going to lead to lower prices. Yet that's clearly not the pattern we've seen from these builders. Is this shadiness and keeping supply lower so prices stay higher? I don't know.
About 2/3, 70% of the unit growth that the big builders are delivering is from acquisitions.
The two biggest home builders in the United States are D.R. Horton and Lennar. Both have outperformed the S&P 500 between August 2014 and August 2024.
Their business is really going gangbusters, and if you look at the stocks, they're way up because they were able to grab such market share. A lot of the small to mid-sized builders just simply couldn't make the math work. Their borrowing costs were so high that a lot of them either went out of business or
definitely a problem nationwide.
Builders.
At the end of its 2023 fiscal year, D.R. Horton closed about 83,000 homes at an average price of about $382,000.
83,000.
Respond to CNBC's request for a comment. Lennar ended its 2023 fiscal year with about 73,000 homes delivered at an average price of $446,000. Lennar didn't provide
So those two builders putting out about 150,000 new homes in 23 still can't keep up.
For example, Lennar's 2017 takeover of WCI Communities. Lennar paid $643 million for the company, approximately a 37% share price premium. The transaction combined two of the largest home builders in Florida.
This whole structural change in competition came from a very difficult situation that started in the Great Recession. If you have a great crisis, who are the players that can withstand the crisis and actually survive? Are those that are bigger, that have more access to capital? But not only that, a lot of them were receiving a massive liquidity boost from stimulus packages in the early 2010s. The 13 largest home builders received around $2.4 billion. They could use these resources in any way they wanted.
In the intervening years, D.R. Horton, Pulte Group, and other big builders struck mega deals too. Experts believe that the industry became less productive as its lead companies consolidated.
There's no doubt that the industry has become less productive. The time to go from concept to built home has definitely increased as I've seen it year over year. When I worked in the construction industry in my teens and 20s, no doubt we were putting homes out, I would say 2 to 3 months faster than most of our top builders are today.
Average builder, when I started in the early 90s, would tell the consumer that they would deliver the house in 40 or 50 days. Over the course of my career in the last 30 years, that went from weeks to months. So it's incredibly unusual that you have an industry
I don't know about 30 to 50.
Negative productivity, essentially, where it's getting longer versus shorter. To be honest, it's not like the house is super more efficient or more tech friendly than it would have been before.
They're also able to bring down their own costs because they've simplified the models of the home. There are far fewer actual floor plans and models that you can choose from.
There would be 10% more housing built if we had the levels of competition of 2006. Are they getting?
You can definitely see the simplicity. No doubt in today's models compared to the early 2000s, much more simplistic homes.
And that's why we have antitrust regulation and regulators. And that is where maybe the regulators should have been a little more strict.
President Biden made competition a focal point during his time in office. His lead regulators, Lena Khan at the Federal Trade Commission and Jonathan Kanter at the Department of Justice, have taken a sharper stance on business mergers. Observers on Wall Street believe that a Harris administration could take a different approach to antitrust policy.
They feel confident at some level that she's going to maybe have a lighter touch on regulation.
The policies from the federal government especially that are aimed at increasing housing supply should also look at competition.
On the campaign trail, Vice President Kamala Harris has called for subsidies to help builders construct 3 million new homes. If approved, the tax credit would go to builders who sell starter homes to first-time homebuyers. Harris has also called for $25,000 in down payment assistance for some first-time homebuyers and rent caps on corporate landlords.
I will say this, I do think that incentivizing builders with tax credits to build more starter homes can have a very positive effect. That being said, as we start to look at some of the programs of subsidies and some of that other stuff that is proposed, I get concerned because the more you start to flood the industry with that government money, oftentimes the less efficiency seems to be built into the system. So while I do believe that tax incentives for builders to build those starter homes can be a very valuable thing, I think we have to be really careful with how we're pumping government money into the housing market.
On corporate landlords and cap unfair rent increases.
The Biden-Harris administration has also awarded transportation grants to communities that allow more dense housing construction. and they've asked Congress to provide a one-year $10,000 tax credit for homeowners who sell starter homes to other owner-occupants. That could increase the number of pre-existing homes on the market, but also risks increasing demand for housing. The Republican Party wants to address housing affordability too. Its 2024 platform says the party will reduce mortgage rates by slashing inflation, open some federal land for home construction, and also provide tax incentives for first-time homebuyers. In his campaign, former President Trump has criticized both Biden and Harris for the inflation that occurred during their administration.
Again, this is when I get concerned because in the end, I don't believe any party is going to be able to control inflation to that degree, especially to the point where you're going to use it to control housing prices. That being said, tax credits for buyers is definitely a great incentive. It doesn't address the situation, though, where our supply is so low. So that is one where ultimately, I think the incentive does need to lie within the building industry so that we are more focused on those starter homes versus McMansions.
Republicans have a plan to bring down prices and bring them down very, very rapidly.
His Agenda 47 platform claims that a Democratic administration would abolish zoning for single-family homes, allowing the building of apartments in suburbs and destroying property values in the process.
The alternative to all of this is, well, if you don't allow this to happen, the neighborhoods are going to change regardless. And the neighborhoods are going to be changing because now a developer comes in, purchased that old single-family detached home, and they put in place a McMansion that really changes the character of the neighborhood as well.
No matter who controls the White House, the president will need to rely on the other wings of government to address the housing shortage.
True.
There's no reason to think that housing supply is going to change that much. Ultimately, it's a function of the number of permits that are made available to the builders. The demand is going to keep increasing.
It's going to take time to really resolve that shortage that we have built up for decades. If the laws are complex and the land is not made available, they don't come out and build.
So there it is. What are your thoughts? Are we really looking at a consolidation issue amongst the builders in the country? Are we looking at really price fixing by holding supply low? Or are we looking at a situation where the environment makes it incentivized for them to put out the most profitable home, the McMansion that we seem to see so often today? And is government policy of moving towards heavier, more high density population areas, building more apartments, building more townhomes, looking at really consolidating people into a smaller area, the best way to go for us to fix this crisis? We see what they think there at CNBC. I don't know that that's exactly what we're facing. I think a lot of this still comes into the system of building new homes and the volatility from interest rates, which are quite directly affected by federal rate policy. While it doesn't tie right to the rate, no question it ties into the economy, and at that stage it does affect where those rates are. So obviously a lack of stability in lending is definitely a piece of it. I would also say a lack of incentive for builders to put up those smaller starter homes is a big piece. Most people don't move into a 2,300 square foot, 4-bedroom, 2.5 bath right out of the gate. There's usually levels to moving up in that. And then of course, ultimately deeper is, do we have enough skilled trades out there to meet the demand? And how can we help control the price of labor and the price of materials? One of the things for sure is stabilizing in that market. So let me know what you think in the comments. Let's take a look. What does it really take to fix this marketplace and to get us on track when it comes to really the crisis that's hitting the nation when it comes to pricing and affordability? And if you're looking for a place here in West Michigan and you're looking for affordability as a piece of that, reach out to me. I would love to show you what options exist for you and your family. My information is in the comments below.